But our top story takes us to Europe, where an energy crisis is driving freight rates down. Here in studio to talk more about it is JP Hampstead, strategic analyst for FreightWays. It's really nice to see you live and in person. Did you just fly in from Europe?
No, it's great to be here.
Okay.
I'm not in Europe, but what's going on in Europe is actually really important. It's going to affect global freight markets, especially ocean container rates across the world, and also air rates. What we're seeing right now is very high energy prices in Europe. Sometimes 4, 5, 10 times as expensive as normal, and that's really putting a damper on consumer spending. Right, people don't have the money to buy goods. Even with the relief measures that the UK and Germany are talking about, Goldman Sachs still estimates that higher energy prices could take 10% out of Europe's GDP.
Wow.
Right. So we're talking about what's being contemplated is not just like a minor recession or some temporary economic shock, but a decadal sort of depression and really, really bad stuff. Right. And so we've seen ocean container rates from China to Rotterdam drop by anywhere from 24 to 18% since the beginning of July. That's sort of whether you're looking at Freightos, whether you're looking at Drewry. We've also seen so that's the consumption, right? That's telling us that Europeans are not buying and they're not importing.
Right.
It's also affecting production. So if you look at if you go into Container Alice and you look at the volumes coming out of Rotterdam to all global ports, that's also way down, double digits, down 24%. So
the consumer economy and the manufacturing industrial economy both kind of a double dip type of thing.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, like Europe's best imports, its most valuable imports, things like German automobiles, take a lot of energy to manufacture.
Sure, I would imagine.
Yeah, one of the container lines standard tactics for dealing with softness in one trade lane, right, is to move vessels from one service to the other, right? They're trying to reposition capacity so that they can maintain higher rates. They're doing that. They're trying to do that with the China to Europe trade lane. Mm-hmm. It's not working very well because there's nowhere for those vessels to go.
Right.
Trans-Pacific is already soft. Right. And so it's if they're taking extra vessels from the China to Europe trade, putting them in Trans-Pacific, that's just going to make things worse there and drive rates down even further. So there's no the fact that the two major trade lanes are weakening rapidly has global consequences for ocean container rates, for air rates.
Yeah, because it's not like before when when things were ramping up, they took a lot of capacity first. Well, they took capacity off anchor first, right? And then they started moving stuff from north-south lanes to east-west and west-east type lanes, right? That's all gone. Now, so you can't.
That's been happening.
There's nothing else to do.
And they've been reducing capacity on, out of, from China to Europe. It's been going down, but it hasn't been fast enough, and the rates are plummeting.
So let me ask you this: is this going to reveal the fact that larger ships are actually not a good slope to be going down because now they're going less often, and so now you have these bigger waves of freight coming in and bigger delays because you don't have smaller vessels moving at a more rapid pace?
I think that's one thing. I also think that the container lines that have this huge windfall of billions of dollars of extra profit that they normally don't have are going to have to figure out other ways to invest that money. They can't just keep building larger ships. They can't just keep adding capacity to a softening and weakening market, right? You're going to see people like Maersk, people like CMA CGM look inland, I think, to buy up other kinds of logistics services, other kinds of transport.
And we've already seen that, right?
Yeah. We have Maersk Pilot Freight Services being a key example. But I think that is going to continue, and any kind of undervalued transportation company in the United States or Europe that has a low market cap is probably a target. So that's a pretty big deal. And all of this, of course, is a consequence of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine.
Sure.
The sort of bifurcation of the global economy. Mm-hmm. and it has really interesting consequences, not just for Europe, but also for the U.S. I mean, if you look at current railroad volumes in the U.S., the only commodities that are doing well are like grain, coal, frac sand, and chemicals. It all has to do with energy and food.
Yeah,
right. Right. Which are being like which now we need to supply to Europe because Russia can't. So now 60% of our LNG exports are going to Europe. 2 years ago, it was like 20%.
And so with this, JP, so as we mentioned, this stems out of the Russian invasion, but the consequences have took kind of 6 months to really shake out, kind of show face at the extreme levels that they have. What do we think timeline on fixing this would be, if there is one right now? Or are we still kind of waiting to see what really happens with the international crisis of Russia-Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, the United States wants Germany and the EU to hold fast against Russia and to keep the boycotts and the sanctions up. As we know, energy demand is like seasonal, right? Like it takes a lot of energy to heat all these countries in the winter, the colder winter than the United States. So like that's part of the reason why this is like emerging now. But the Goldman Sachs note that I read, which focused on the European utilities sector, basically was operating from the assumption that Europe is going to have to build their way out of it. And it was kind of saying that like you're looking at these utility stocks, there's some short-term risk of like regulation that the governments aren't going to let the utilities make this much money, but long-term, they're going to have to plow billions of euros into building out more power infrastructure. And so like if building their way out of this is the solution, then it will take years.
Right. Yeah. And then along that same thread, with the economic crisis kind of coming to a head first, what does the humanitarian fallout look like after that? Are we talking about people now having to seek refuge out of maybe their own country other than Ukraine with the invasion now because they can't afford to live where they're living? Or is there any type of other humanitarian crisis that we see impacted with maybe food shortages, anything like that?
I mean, it's definitely going to, like major European cities, have problems with poverty. They have problems with, like unassimilated migrant populations. They have issues with like delivering social services to all of these like new people. I would expect really high energy prices and high food prices to stress that a lot. Like I'm not predicting that like there will be like waves of like French people like crossing the Atlantic, but certainly like politically there will be lots of pressure.
Does this cause an escalation of the war and more entrance into it? I mean, is that a threat? I mean, because it seems like it is a okay, we give up because we can't survive this, but that doesn't seem like the right option, right? So is it escalation to solve this or what? Because giving in means okay, who's next?
I think
Poland or Sweden or what, right?
I think that like our arms shipments to the Ukraine are definitely part of this balance, right?
Sure.
Like the thing has always been, like Germany will let us build Air Force bases and have like nuclear weapons and like, do whatever we want as long as we are, shouldering the sort of, the common defense, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it's like, as long as we are arming Ukraine, as long as we are stopping Putin, as long as we're degrading the Russian military, I think that European politicians will be under a lot of pressure from the United States government to, maintain these boycotts, right?
Stay with the boycotts, right. Yeah.
And so then with that, JP, to kind of round things out and bring it back home, obviously what the U.S. is doing is exporting a ton of energy exports right now and really trying to help them out, help Europe out on that side. What about what this means for European exports to the U.S.? Is there any type of threat there for decreases or issues with that?
Those to me, those are going to be really driven by American demand. So it's like, if the American economy is strong and we are buying, we will continue to buy from Europe. Prices like could go up if their costs of manufacturing go up and things like that. But I mean, freight rates out of Europe should be going down. It may be kind of a wash. I mean, the whole thing is a really interesting new paradigm. In the sort of perfectly flat Thomas Friedman world of like globalization, you would assume that a depression in Europe would eventually cause a depression in the United States. But now, we actually have like strengths relative to our trading partners in this new world order. We produce an excess of energy. We produce an excess of food.
Gotcha.
Higher prices for those commodities could end up helping us in the long run.
It could end up helping us, but is that necessarily a good thing, though, right? I mean, because we've had this crisis, and very few people even talk about it anymore because it doesn't impact their life, unless we're out here telling you that it impacts your life and other media, obviously.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't.
It's interesting. I mean,
so if there's no impact here, and actually we see our economy pick up because Europe is hurting, we don't have any. The American people won't.
There's
say,
no
hey, we need to
say,
stop
hey.
Putin. Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing there to say, hey, everything's great. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, it is. I think there's a very strong disconnect between like what the average person thinks about like the prices they pay in the supermarket or at the gas pump and like how like foreign policy works. And it's going to be really tricky for President Biden and his administration to communicate effectively like what the American people are being asked to do and why. But it already is having like some positive effects, right? Like we were trending, like our grain volumes on the rails were trending like -5% year over year for most of the year. Past 4 weeks, they've been positive 15%. Last week, they were positive 22%. Like that's directly because of the way that the trade relationships have changed since this war started, right?
Gotcha.
So like, there's going to be good and there's going to be bad. It's very complicated, and unfortunately, I think it is like a sort of a murky issue that lots of people are going to be telling their own stories about. Lots of people are going to be trying to like exploit for one reason or another.
Yeah.
All right, JP, thank you for being here with us today. Of course, we can find your article all about this up on freightwaves.com if you want to go check that out. Right now, we're going to head on over to The Wall. We've got our first carrier update of the morning.